Friends, good evening, and a very warm welcome to each and to all, whether you are padded up in expectancy in the pews or watching from the internet pavilion. Welcome on behalf of St Columba's Church of Scotland here at Pont Street, and welcome on behalf of Scots in London, the umbrella association of some 12 organisations, sporting and social, business and military, congregational and charitable, are all under the patronage of the Princess Royal. This evening, conversation will turn to flannelled fools, past and present. How does that connect either to a Presbyterian church in London or a nation more famous for footballing passions and its tartan army? Well, if conversation, anecdote and laughter require further justification, for the record, St Columba's stands on the site of a cricket ground, the former Prince's Club ground, early home of Middlesex County Cricket Club in the 1870s, prior to their move to a longer-lasting Lord's. After the congregation's formation in 1884 in this place, the first society founded was the Literary Society, and the second, the St Columba's Cricket Club. And cricket north of the border? Tonight, I think we're in for both a delight and possibly a surprise, as perhaps our eyes are open to some of Scotland's rich but hidden cricketing history. So without further ado, let the bell call our opening bats to the wicket, introduced by our resident umpire, Hugh Pym.
Thank you very much, Angus, for that very nice welcome, and thank you everybody who's here and out there watching us virtually on the live stream. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests and say what a pleasure it is to have a chance to chat about cricket for an hour, particularly with these two. So Emma John is an award-winning cricket author, podcaster, broadcaster and member of the MCC. Fraser Sim, historian of Scottish cricket, chair of the Scottish Cricket Society, a former county player with Peeblesshire, and active Church of Scotland member in the Borders. So I'd like to start with a question. If you see me, by the way, looking at my mobile phone, it's not to check cricket scores or anything else. It's to see if there are any questions coming through. So please don't be worried if you see me looking at the phone. So I'd like to start with a question. In a momentous week for sport in England, pause, with England's victory in 3 ODIs against Pakistan with the third string team, and England women's series victory against India. First of all, Emma, what do you think about the state of cricket in England at international level for limited overs?
I mean, yes, certainly if we could just say, England are basically basically the best one-day international side in the world. I think that definitely goes to the men, and it goes the women are definitely right up there as well, although it was really nice to see India give them a good run this week. The fact that England can basically put out a C side and still beat Pakistan, who are a good side. I mean, that Pakistan team played pretty well in 2019 when they came over and played a series against England, and they did pretty well in the World Cup. Got to the quarterfinals, if I remember. They've always been called they've recently been called a mercurial side. I think they get called mercurial actually, for most of their history, which is often really unfair. The Pakistan team that's playing at the moment is a kind of developing team that hasn't been able to play a lot at all over the last 2 years. England has been very privileged in that regard, that they've managed to keep up a really full schedule during the pandemic, whereas Pakistan only really got to play Zimbabwe and one other side. Was it West Indies? No, Zimbabwe and It'll come back to me.
Yes.
Was it
I might need to check my phone on that one.
They won both of their series anyway. I mean, they're a really good side. So the fact that England's sort of third team, which wasn't even a team before last week. I mean, that's the funny thing about it. Is just it's not like they are England's third team. They really are the reserves for the reserves. They're the understudies for the understudies, and they weren't expecting to play. They didn't have any time together to prepare. And I think the fact that they came out and then they played the Owen Morgan England brand of cricket, speaks volumes about how strong England are as a one-day side and how deep their culture goes. It's not just that the talent pool is deep, it's that everybody knows what you have to do if you wear the England one-day shirt. You have to go out and you have to bat like Joss Butler and Jason Roy and Johnny Bairstow, and the fact that Phil Salt, who's literally never appeared for England in any form before, comes out and does it on his second and third try after trying it on his first try. He just got out a bit too early. But the fact that they've got the confidence to do that, the fact that they've got the kind of the backing to do that is it's. I mean, I think it's really positive sign, not just for England potentially retaining the World Cup in 3 more years' time, but also it's a good sign for their T20 side. I think that the fact that they've got these explosive players who are all looking to make a big impact this year.
And of course, it's the T20 2020 World Cup coming up in the autumn, I think in the UAE, Fraser.
Just to add to that, what Emma was saying, I think what strikes me about the England teams, both women's and men's, is that they're well led, and B, people know what's wanted of them. They've got a settled team. I think what will be a challenge is when Ewan Morgan decides it's time to retire, finding a leader. I think the leader leads the culture, and I think they've built on that so well over the last several years.
And of course, we shouldn't forget that Scotland beat England, a pretty strong team in a one-day international.
It was a very strong team. I think there was only maybe two players that weren't in the cup final in 2019. It was a batting feast, and Callum MacLeod, of course, scored all those runs for Scotland, and Bairstow did by reply. But the sad thing about Scotland on that event is that it hasn't been followed on. It's not their fail, they just haven't hardly had any games. And their captain, Preston Momsen, decided not to be captain anymore because there's no team to be a captain for. They weren't getting, this is before coronavirus. So they haven't had the opportunity. There is a pathway there to take the associate countries into competitions such as the T20 World Cup or the World Cup, whichever. It is there. But the ICC really needs to do more to arrange opportunities for teams like Scotland and others, Netherlands and so on, to get much more action. Because that game against England is almost the last game that Scotland have played, and that's 2.5 years ago.
So coming up shortly is a new brand of cricket. For those who are here and watching, just need a reminder, it's called the 100, designed to appeal to a new audience. They've even changed the rules, and I've seen a report today that the umpire, instead of saying over, says 5, because it's a 5-ball, whatever it's called. I mean, let's start, Emma, with, do you think it's a good idea, this thing, a completely new product, as they call it?
Okay, well, if you had asked me before they came up with the idea, or even at the very point where they announced it, I would definitely have said no, because I would have said, as pretty much everybody said, I think, at the time, most cricket fans who love cricket just didn't like this idea, and we all thought, why do we need another tournament? We already know that the game has struggled and suffered with the many different tournaments that already exist. How to keep focus, how to keep your national teams together when there's so many opportunities for people to play in all different countries and different tournaments. How do you keep your players rested and uninjured? So why do we need another tournament, especially when it's not that different from T20 essentially. It's very slightly shorter, but it's still going to take 2 hours instead of 3. And it did feel, I think, for a lot of us like, well, this is just a process of reductio ad absurdum. You know, it's just, well, okay, 3 hours is, apparently 3 hours is too long for some people to concentrate, so now we're going to do a 2-hour game. So does that mean, you know, we're going to bring back double wicket contests and just have 2 players out in the middle, you know, playing 1 over a side eventually? And then, you know, the argument from the ECB has been, as we all know, well, this isn't for you. All you people who are getting upset about it, this isn't actually cricket for you. This is in order to bring new people who just find cricket too confusing and too complicated into the game. And I sort of feel like at that stage I have to just take a breath and say, well, it's here now, so I wish it well, because I think it is nice for to offer something that might appeal to people who don't like the current offerings that cricket has. There are problems with, for example, T20 crowds. I don't know how many people go to T20 games here, but I certainly before the pandemic would go to the Middlesex games at Lord's, and the atmosphere there, and certainly at some of the games at Edgbaston and Trent Bridge I've been to as well, is it's a really quite riotous, rowdy, boisterous night out. And so I can totally understand, actually, and this has certainly been the case for some friends of mine who have kids that say they wouldn't particularly, it's not an atmosphere that they particularly want to take their kids to. And if the 100 is very different, and, you know, it's a kind of really, you know, kids first environment, then I think we've got to essentially hold our judgment until we see. My big issue with it, my big issue with the argument that it makes cricket less complicated is cricket is not complicated because it has 6 ball overs. I mean, that is one of the things that is kind of weird and complicated about cricket, and certainly if I was describing it to people, you know, they'd be like, what? So you have 6 balls and then you change it? Well, yeah, that is one thing that's complicated about cricket, but changing the number 6 to the number 5 and letting bowlers bowl both 5s from one end does not actually make the process any less complicated. And I sort of think, unless you're going to say, well, the LBW rule doesn't exist, or the LBW is simplified to the extent that basically if you get hit on the pad in front of the stumps, you're out. We're not de-simplifying the LBW rule in the 100. It's still going to be there. So there are still going to be people watching it who go, wait, why was that out when it hit them in the pad in front of the stumps, when that wasn't out when it hit them in the front? And how come this one, even though it hit them outside the line of the stump, it's still out, but this one hit them outside the leg stump and it's not out? That is complicated, and I think cricket is complicated, and I think that's probably one of the things that a lot of us enjoy about it and was what drew us into it in the first place. And you can't simplify it to turn it into baseball, which is also a complicated sport.
Absolutely. Fraser, what do you think of it? I think you made a point to me earlier that you were around at the launch of one-day cricket in the early 60s, and there was a lot of throwing hands in the air then. I
was 14 years old when they brought in the Gillette Cup, and I remember thinking what a breath of fresh air it was. Until then, you had the static county championship. The same teams won, usually Yorkshire or Surrey, and it was quite slow. And the Gillette Cup really opened things up, quick scoring, and so on. And that was after that, you had the John Player League, Benson, and so on. So I was in the new guard at the time. I'm not now. I'd have to ask the question, what's different between the 100 and the T20? I know it's 100 balls rather than 120, but it's the same kind of thing. When the Gillette Cup came in, the money spent on it was £50 prize to the man of the match, times 15, £750 for the year. Maybe a little bit expenses for the person who adjudicated, say £1,000 for the year. That'd be the cost of it. The cost of this new tournament, I believe, is about 30 million. Is that correct? rather more than £1,000. I have reservations about the names of the teams. So if you're from Lancashire, but not Manchester, if you're Liverpool or Blackpool or somewhere else, you're expected to support the Manchester, what's it, Originals or something? Another name. And same if you're in Gloucestershire or Somerset, you're supporting Welsh Fire and so on. So I think you're potentially going to alienate the rest of these counties, and certainly the ones that are left out of it. And being a bit old-fashioned now, I'm not sure you need words like invincibles or originals or fire or spirit. That doesn't do anything for me in the cricket team. It tells you nothing about the place. We haven't seen it happen yet. Until it takes off next week or whatever, we'll maybe be proved wrong. At the moment, I hope they've done their sums right, and they're going to get a lot of that £30 million back from all the various sources. We shall see.
So that's sort of looking forward. Let's look back maybe into the last century. Fraser, I think people maybe, down in the south of England sometimes don't look at cricket in Scotland closely enough. And it has maybe an image of being, not really a very popular game. But can you put us right on that? And I won't ask you to do a history of Scottish cricket in 2 minutes, because that would be very unfair. But just give us a flavour for how important a game it has been and is in Scotland.
Well, the first recorded match in Scotland was 1785. Record is the important word. I'm sure it was played before. For instance, in 1740s, Scots descendants in Georgia and South Carolina were playing cricket there. They would hardly have made it up in America. They must have taken it with them from Scotland, but there's no record of the game. So the first recorded match was 1785, and it's recorded. It was played at Alloa, and it's recorded because the Earl of Winchelsea played in it. And the Earl of Winchelsea was involved in the formation of MCC in 1787. The first recorded century in Scotland was 1789 by Charles Lennox, who had just come out of a duel with the Duke of York. They shot each other. I think they hit each other, but they didn't kill each other. But Lennox was a bit of a rogue character, and he was involved in buying the first MCC ground in 1789. 1787, sorry. So that's why it was mentioned. In due course, Lennox became the Earl of Richmond, and it was his wife who had the big bowl at Waterloo. If you remember, on the battlefield, they had the bowl in Brussels, and they could hear the guns of the French in Waterloo at Lady Richmond's bowl. Richmond himself became Governor-General of Canada, and he died bitten by a fox. Not relevant to cricket, but never mind. It's a nice story. Cricket gradually grew in Scotland. Mainly, the industrial age brought iron mining from England into Coatbridge and Paisley, textiles to the borders. And as these skills in the industrial sphere grew, cricket spread as well. One almost unknown factor is the Yorkshire bowler Wilfred Rhodes, who burst onto the scene with 154 wickets in his first year. He didn't come from nowhere, he came from Galashiels. What I mean by that is that he played for 2 years with Galashiels Cricket Club in the Borders, getting 100 wickets each year. And they said to him, "You're too good for us. You want to go and further your career somewhere else." So he's a Yorkshireman, of course. He played for Yorkshire, won 54 wickets his first year. Second year, he's playing for England with W.G. Grace, 1899. So Rhodes was playing in Scotland before he played for Yorkshire. One of the foremost Scottish players was Leslie Balfour Melville. A bit like Campbell Bannerman, his name was Balfour, but he added Melville because he inherited an estate. So Balfour Melville played as a young laddie in a kilt for the Free Foresters in the 1960s, 1860s, right. And then he played for Scotland in 1872 and scored 100 against the Australians. They beat the Australians. It's a slightly misnomer that, because they were playing Australia and lost in 1 day. So they played a second game to make up the difference, and they beat the Australians in that match. But Balfour Melville was champion of tennis, golf, snooker. He would have played for Scotland in the first rugby international, except he was bitten by a dog. And at the age of 55, as president of the Scottish Cricket Union, he scored 91 against Ireland in 1909. That's just a few snippets.
There's lots of lovely colour in your books as well, which we can talk about a bit later, Fraser. But is it worth reminding ourselves that the England team really is the team for the UK? And Scots have played for England. Emma, you probably remember Mike Durness was captain of England, going way back a little while.
I remember in a theoretical sense.
Yes.
I'm too young
So that's
for that.
maybe, yeah. But then Gavin Hamilton, Dougie Brown. So there've been some Scottish internationals. But yes, I'm afraid I do remember Mike Durness.
There was a chap that played for Oxford University in Somerset, Raymond Robertson Glasgow, and there's a famous story he tells that he was playing against Essex and he clean bowled Charlie McGahey, and McGahey came back to the pavilion and they said, "What happened?" "I was bowled by a chap called Robinson Crusoe." That's actually true.
Do you remember Gavin Hamilton? I think he only played one test, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, Gavin Hamilton was one of the one-test wonders of the 90s, wasn't he?
It was no real wonder. It was a bit of a disaster because he got a pair, scored no runs, and he took no wickets. And never played. It was a shame because he'd had a very good year for Yorkshire the year before that. But his form dipped quite suddenly, unfortunately.
And of course, Scotland would play in the old Benson and Hedges tournament against English counties. And have you ever covered them, Emma, in your travels?
Well, no, because I think by the time I was covering cricket in the early 2000s, the Benson Hedges was on its way out, and then NatWest had stopped doing the early. It was a minor county. It had early rounds, didn't it, that involved minor counties, and Scotland would also, I think, feature in that.
The Scottish team did win occasionally. I think one year they won. There's usually about five. They usually played about 5 or 6 games, and the top team or top 2 went through. And Scotland, I think one year they won 2 of those 5 or 6 games. That was the best. Sometimes they won 1, but the other counties would see them as a definite 2-pointer or whatever you call it. But I've seen them beat Worcestershire. I've seen them beat Durham. I think they beat Lancashire once as well. So they have had a few scalps.
I've got a question, which is what's the reason that Irish cricket has had this real bump in recent years, whereas Scotland, like you said, it's sort of gone off the boil, whereas Ireland's been given all these opportunities.
Well, I can remember Mike Hendrick. Mike Hendrick was coach of the Scottish team. He played for Derbyshire in England. He was coach of the Scottish team and coach of the Irish team. I remember him saying the Scottish team is much better organised. That's out of date. The Irish team had a cohort of very, very good players. Obviously, Morgan was part of it. And there's a few others that all came to fruition at the same time, quality. And they took it on. I think we have to take it hats off to Ireland being well organised, good players and committed. And they left Scotland in their wake. There's not that much difference between them. But the Irish have it. And unfortunately, I see Ireland beat South Africa yesterday, in fact. But there's a danger that Ireland could go off the boil, but maybe not.
So, Emma, looking ahead to the next Test series, England-India, for the men's team, that'll be fascinating, won't it? Have you got tickets lined up and everything?
I am going to go to the Lord's Test, which I'm very excited about. I think India are they are the glamour team of world cricket right now. They're not officially the best team, obviously, in the world. We know that because New Zealand beat them in the World Test Championship. So India only get to be number 2 now, which is I actually was really surprised about. I mean, I think the fact that New Zealand had. It's a funny thing about the World Test Championship that all boils down to this one test, but the circumstances for both of those teams playing in it are completely different because New Zealand have been in England and have been acclimatising to the conditions and have just had a lovely warm-up series in English conditions against England, and India come in cold and then have to play New Zealand and lose. And I'm very glad for New Zealand, and I'm really happy for them to be the World Test Champions. Not least because we really owe them one after 2019 and the World Cup final. So I'm very happy for them. But I do wonder whether, how completely sort of fair that contest was, and what it, whether it really says that India are not, right up there with them. And I honestly think that despite the English conditions, despite the, unfortunately nascent COVID in their camp, which we found out about this week, that you know, that India are going to have to cope with, you know, and isolate some players. I still think that they are just... I don't think there's any team in the world that has as much talent in it as India right now. Like, I think that's indisputable. Like, that they have more talent than any other side, and probably more flair than any other side. And I find them mesmeric. I can't wait.
Isn't the problem, though, with all Test cricket, that you can win very easily on your home patch? And obviously India thrashed England earlier this year. I can't even remember what the last year has been a bit of a blur. But anyway, and now India come to England and wickets are very different, the climate's different, it suits England bowlers. Is there a likelihood England will just prepare pitches to suit themselves?
They might do, but I don't think we can bank on the England Test batsmen to stand up to the Indian bowlers in those conditions. India have some great pace and seam, and I think, given that we have seen England's Test batting collapse like a house of cards repeatedly over the last 2 years, really, not even just the last year, I don't think that we can. I don't think it's going to be a mismatch. That's for sure. And you're right about the different kind of conditions. It's one of the sort of frustrations, but also one of the beauties about cricket that we do have this situation where home advantage is very, very real, and I think particularly for England. But we know that in some ways that's a massive disadvantage, because it means as soon as you tour, you know, certainly in the English case, often going to Australia, you know, England used to get caught out so often on Australia's pacey wickets and good batting tracks, and I think it's actually one of the elements that means that, you know, when a team wins abroad, it's a really big deal. You know, when India won in Australia, that was huge. When Australia win in India, that's huge. That's it's sort of part of our history, and I don't think we'll probably ever. I say we won't ever change or lose that. Who knows? You can't tell anything post-pandemic. It might be that we all have to start playing all of our matches in the UAE and on the same wickets over and over again. We just don't know now, do we?
And of course we don't know, sadly, how things will pan out in August, but I think it's sell-out crowds at most of the Test fixtures, which will be the first ones with a full crowd, because the New Zealand one was slightly controlled, wasn't it, at Lord's? And that'll be a joy, particularly against India, with lots of fans supporting India.
I remember the Indian team in the 70s and 60s. They had these magic spinners, Durrani, Chandrasekhar, Prasanna, Venkataraghava and Bedi. They were brilliant, and it was a magic about a mystery. But they weren't. Most of those bowlers didn't bat very much, but the setup now is much more professional. I think this chap Pant, the wicketkeeper, I think he's an exceptional talent. I think he's one to watch for. He just seems to have no fear. So I would think that there's a lot of excitement awaiting us.
And of course, India dominates the world game because of the size of the economy and the number of fans, and the IPL, the Indian Premier League, has been a great success. Do you see, I mean, there have been one or two complaints, they're too dominant in terms of calling the shots, but do you think, you know, good luck to them? They're a nation of cricket fans, why not?
I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's really interesting, you know, we've had a cricketing history in which England and Australia have always been the dominant nations, and that's why the Ashes was, you know, the unofficial kind of world championship of cricket every single time. And I think it got very annoying and very boring for supporters of other teams who were like, we literally don't care about the Ashes, you know, stop making all of cricket about the Ashes. But we held on to it, and you know, we still do it. I mean, Joe Root is still saying, and Chris Silverwood is still saying, you know, oh, well, we're not too worried about losing to New Zealand, despite the fact that they're the best team, they're officially the best team in the world. We're not too worried about that because we're looking ahead to the Ashes. I mean, that's just wrong. It's you know, I don't think Joe Root is an arrogant person, but it's the classic kind of English arrogance of attitude. And the fact that India have, you know, essentially like taken over cricket and are now doing the same to us and to Australia and to the rest of the world is you can argue that it's not a good thing for all sorts of reasons, but you can't argue it's unfair. I think is my feeling about it. I think it's very political, and I know that, for example, the Indian cricket writer, the Indian historian and sometime sports writer Ramachandra Guha, I chatted to him about it this summer, and it concerns him greatly because what he sees is India taking exactly the same imperial position towards cricket, brackets, and politics as we've decried England for doing so often in the past. And he says we shouldn't be essentially decolonising cricket just in order to replace it with another empire. I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I think cricket and politics are incredibly intertwined in every country, but just as it happens at the moment, because India has the money and the power and the influence, that is very political. I mean, they the last Test match that England played against them was in the Modi Stadium, the Narendra Modi Stadium. They just named this massive colossus of a ground after a very populist prime minister. So I think it's something that cricket has to think about and deal with. But I don't really see how anyone, given how much of international cricket is driven by finance and money, I don't see how anyone is challenging that anytime soon.
I think one thing that's not been solved is the matter of context. In the old days, a team came for a tour, they played all the counties, and there was a pattern and rhythm to it. Now you're getting two test match tours. A team flies out, plays a couple of test matches and goes away again. It doesn't have a time to acclimatise, to build up, to have a presence. And as soon as those short mini series are over, another one follows. This is almost that's been put to the past. And there's no. I know the Test Championship was there as an attempt to give everything a bit of context. It partially succeeded, I suppose, but I still think the problem is there. And I suppose the Ashes gives you a bit of context. The time they got it really wrong was it 2013 when they played a series in England, followed immediately within 3 or 4 months with another one. I can't think what they were thinking of there. And of course it backfired. They got thrashed by the Australians. But so the context is looking to be added somewhere.
You mentioned the Ashes, and sorry Emma, we were going to get onto it, but we'll be very brief. But I'd like to just quickly, we've got 9 or 10 questions, so cyberspace and our audience are really wide awake, and that's great. Thank you very much. But on the Ashes, Fraser, 1948, the invincible Australian team were greeted as celebrities, world famous, and the Ashes is so famous that Don Bradman made it even more so, the great start. But they played 2 games in Scotland at the end of their tour, and do tell us a little bit about those, that they would play to huge crowds and then they would go to Scotland and end their tour at Balmoral, I think.
The number of people who saw the Australians in Aberdeen is probably more than the population that Aberdeen exists. I think everyone says we were there in 48. I actually wrote to the 2 living surviving members of that Scottish team that played the Australians in 48. Ian Lumsden of Watsonians, who played rugby for Scotland and cricket. He was in Australia, and Guy Willett, who played for Derbyshire and Scotland as well. And Willett was very interesting because he said, what I can remember is we were invited to Balmoral, and what a mess the place was in. Papers strewn everywhere, and there was Keith Miller with his arm around Princess Margaret. And the one thing we weren't allowed to do, we weren't allowed to photograph Princess Elizabeth, who was in an advanced state of pregnancy with Prince Charles. So that was, you remembered that. But coming back to your question, I gather that J.C. White's daughter is a member of this congregation?
Rosa Somerville.
He was the wicketkeeper who played for the Grange in most of those games. Bradman played, there was two. People tend to think there's only one in Aberdeen. Well, there was one in Edinburgh as well. And Bradman was dismissed for, I think, 27 or something like that. And Australians won both games, but Scotland didn't perform too badly. They held their heads above water. I'd like to tell one little anecdote, though. In the match before the 5th Test, Warwickshire were playing Australians, and Eric Hollies got 8 wickets in the first innings against Australia. And there was a great clamour, bring back Hollies. So Hollies was quite experienced to bring him back in the Test team. And in that game, Australia beat Warwickshire quite easily. But Bradman was having some difficulty reading Hollies' googly, and Hollies thought about it. And in the second innings, Australia had to get 40 runs to win, and they lost a wicket, and Bradman came in. And Dollery, the captain of Warwickshire, said to Hollies, "You'll be coming in to have a look at your googly." And Hollies said to him, "No chance, I'm not going to show it to him." So he just rolled leg spin. And Hollies was recalled to the Test team. And as it happens, when England were rolled over for 52, Australia put on 100 for the first wicket, and the chap was out, and Bradman came into bat against Hollies. And Hollies said to him, "You'll be expecting my googly. I'm not going to bowl it first ball." It's bowled leg spinner. He bowled it second ball, out. And that was Bradman's duck. So the prequel was in the Warwickshire match, just before the Test match. And I picked it up from Hollies' autobiography.
What wonderful story. And I was just going to bring you up to date with this. One of our elders here, Rosa Somerville, her father, J.W. Wykes, was it? Kept wicket for Scotland in that match in Edinburgh with Bradman batting, and that was his last dismissal on British soil. So her father witnessed it, but wait for it, she and her brother has got the ball. So I think we need to follow this one up, because it's just a wonderful piece of history which only emerged very recently. Very, very briefly, Fraser, before we get to questions, just tell us quickly about the Church of Scotland minister, James Aitchison, I think, who played against at a high level and faced the Australians in 1956.
Yes, Jim Aitchison played for Kilmarnock, and he was a minister at Renton, Glasgow, at Stockbridge as well. And he played cricket. He was a very good batsman, and he scored 100 against the South Africans in 47 and 100 against Australians in 56. And in 56, Keith Miller was bowling, and Aitchison came into bat, and Miller says, "I'll just bowl him a playful bouncer first ball." Did it. Aitchison hooked it for 4. Miller said, "Right, that's one off the mark. Now, this is the real bouncer war." And Aitchison hit everyone for 4. And Miller was getting more and more riled, and the crowd, of course, were getting really worked up, excited. When it came to his last man came in, Livingston, he scored 1 run. At the same time, Aitchison got 40. They put 41 on for the last wicket, and Aitchison was 100 not out of 177. And Miller said that was the best innings played against him in 1956.
So there we are. Well, let's go to questions. Charles, yours was sort of answered about why Scotland's never managed to get Test status, but thank you very much so far for the question. Next question from Mr. Perin Paraja for the panel. The ECB launched its anti-discrimination code for the 2021 season. How do you think this should be implemented at clubs and counties in England, Scotland and Wales so we can eliminate all forms of racism in the game?
Say that again.
Launched its anti-discrimination code, but how should it be implemented, the ECB? How should it be implemented to eliminate racism? Of course, there have been some allegations of racism going back a few years in the county game. Some players have talked about it. But anyway, how do you put it into practice?
Well, I think Lancashire not taken their mobile phones off 5 or 6 players or something. I'm too old for this. The idea of people sending messages like this, I can't quite get my head around it. Why would you abuse somebody? I think it's a terrible. But I believe it happens. Obviously, it does. But, it sounds like it's a big thing. I would think. I don't know how far back you go.
I mean, so we've had it's really difficult and awkward for England and for the ECB, because what happened was, England won a World Cup while very kind of putting front and centre the diversity of their team and the inclusivity of their culture. and everything looked really good and, you know, pretty rosy, and, you know, there were lots of really heartfelt, wonderful stories that came out of Owen Morgan's side, for example, like the story which I'm sure you've all heard about, Adel Rashid saying that, you know, Allah was on England's side essentially, and you know, that feeling that, well, look, this is a team that's really kind of representing the best of the country. It's inclusive. It's got people of different faiths and colours and backgrounds. You know, and so it's a very, very positive story. 2019 was a very, very positive year in every respect. And I think what has happened since is that basically world events have shaken everybody out of their complacency. You know, the events in America and the response to George Floyd's killing, and you know, the kind of just the cry for a greater awareness among everybody about the background of structural racism that still exists and still holds people back, has made everybody shine a spotlight on things which it's just like, it's like the flip of 2019. It's like, you know, well, everything looked really good, but hold on, if we, you know, if we pick up the pebble at Headingley, you know, Yorkshire's a really good example. You know, there are players here who say they've encountered, you know, systemic racism, that it's been, you know, things have been said to them on the pitch, and we're not talking 20 years ago, we're talking, you know, 2 years ago. And I think what's happened is that everybody at the ECB has probably been quite shaken out of their own complacency. And really a perfect example of that was, you know, the beginning of was it the first day of the New Zealand test when Ollie Robinson, you know, came out and made his debut? And I mean, you're just asking for trouble if you basically like make your big centerpiece of the whole day, England coming out and wearing their anti-discrimination t-shirts, and you're like, this is who we are, we're totally anti-discrimination of every single form. And then, you know, it's just too easy now. It's just too easy and for people to do Twitter, what's the word they call it? Twitter archaeology? Is it archaeology?
Sounds right.
And where you just go back and you go, hello, is this you? And yeah, it's harsh. It's harsh on people who, you know, might have been tweeting when they were 18 and saying things that they have since realised are absolutely unacceptable. But I do think that, sorry, this is a long-winded way of saying, England have to, and the ECB and every county has to take this seriously, and they have to confront every single report of racism, and they have to listen to the people reporting it, because that's clearly what the problem has been. It's been like, we're very good at the grand gestures, but we're not very good at taking it seriously when somebody actually says, do you know what, somebody belittled me and made me feel small. Because that's just too awkward, and that's like, oh, that's about inter-team dynamics. Well, actually, you've got to deal with it at that level, because otherwise you don't get to wear the t-shirt, really.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very well said. So a question from David. I'm sorry I've got to rattle through these. Maybe this is for Fraser, and I'll ask you to keep them quite brief as we go forward. Where would you like to see Scottish cricket 10 years from now, club and international?
I think the main thing for Scotland is to concentrate on the non-test match. If they get test match status, that's a bonus. I think the one day white ball cricket is the way to go forward, and they have the talent to make a difference. I think they can. Yep.
And club, I mean, I think you told me clubs are pretty thriving in Ayrshire.
The clubs are quite strong. The same clubs have played for the last 120 years are still there. Greenock, West of Scotland, Grange, Carlton, Edinburgh Accies and so on. The club structure is quite strong actually. They're doing okay.
A question from Lucy. What should the selectors do about England's disastrous test match batting lineup? And she means the men's team.
Yeah, because the women's batting lineup is pretty strong, as we saw last night. What should they do? I mean, it's really hard. I think it's going to be extra hard since, since they put Zach Crawley and Dan Lawrence in the one-day team. They're clearly going to, they're seeing those people as the future. I think what people feel frustrated about is that people like Crawley and Sibley were getting drafted into the England team 2 years ago, and there's a sense that you don't get to play the transition card for 2 years, we've seen it before, particularly with England's. It used to be the problem used to be England's openers. Post Alistair Cook, it was or even with Alistair Cook, to some extent towards the end of his career, we just can't find the right partner, and then there's nobody to fill his shoes. I just don't think I don't think it's the England way at the moment to go and draft in new blood. They're doing so much of that in the ODI side and T20 side, and it's hard, as we know, it's very hard to get into the England ODI side. I think that for better or worse, they will really kind of stick and give people more opportunities. It's very much their style. I mean, just look at the fact that James Vince has, just been given, six. It's not like the last chance saloon. It's like the sixth chance saloon for James Vince, and then he's come good. So if anything, it kind of proves their point. I think. Honestly, I wonder how much of it is to do with their actual batting techniques, which I know they work on, and like Dom Sibley's a really good example. When he first joined the England team in that it was the New Zealand Overseas Test Series, wasn't it? At the end of 2019, and people were concerned about his sort of leg side bias, essentially, and he's gone away and he's worked on it, and he's sort of finding other ways to get out now. But it's, I wonder how much it is technique and how much it's to do with that batting team not quite knowing what their job is when they go out there. I think you look at the ODI side, and they have such a strong understanding of what they're going to do. And I think like this last ODI against Pakistan, there was a really good example. It was like if people, the second one was an even better example. People were going out and they were hitting out hard, and we were losing wickets, but there was no kind of sudden like doubt about, oh my goodness, are we doing the right thing? It was like, no, this is the way we play, and it saw them through. And Owen Morgan has proved that works. I don't think that the batting lineup in tests under Joe Root necessarily feels confident that it knows what it's being asked to do every time it goes out, and I think that is more to do with the leadership than it is to do with the batsmen, probably.
Thank you. Charles has made the point that Tony Greig was part Scots, but we can...
His father went to Watson's in Edinburgh, yeah. And Graham and Peter Pollock's father was at Heriot's in Edinburgh as well. So they've got the same kind of link as well. Yeah.
So Charles follows up with one for you, Fraser. Why have village teams in Scotland never done better than Fruki in 1985, who, for those of you who don't know, won the first final of the village cricket competition?
Well, there's not that many that take part. I don't know why. I think it's a question. It's open to as many villages as possible. I think they have better take up in Glamorgan in Yorkshire, and I think Cornwall particularly good at signing up to it. I think Fruki I think they take part every year, and there's a few. I think Meagle's another one in Perthshire, but not many of the clubs such as Kelso have got a good team. They tend not to sign up to it. I think that's why. It's just that they don't come to the tournament.
And I think Fruki won, should we say, is rather the underdogs with a sort of Southern English team thinking they were going to waltz through at Lords, and along comes Fruki from Fife.
There's a story to that. Because Fruki won, I think it was Rowledge of Surrey in the final, in 85 or whatever. And it was actually a tied match. The scores were level, but Fruki won less. And I think Rowledge thought they were going to win. I think they were quite confident. And they got a bit of a shock that they didn't, in fact. And I think it's probably true to say they weren't as gracious in defeat as they might have been. But the good story is this, that afterwards the captain of Rowledge thought about it, and he thought, we could have been more gracious. And he contacted, this is 2 or 3 years afterwards, he contacted Fruki to phone him, said, look, I'd like to apologise on behalf of the team. It had nagged him. It nagged the captain of the Surrey team that they had maybe not said the right things when they lost. But it nagged him so much that he wanted to phone up Fruki and apologise. So I think that said a lot for him. It all ended up with smiles all round, as it should do. So credit to Rowledge for having the guts to say that.
Can I just say that victory is clearly still very important in some people's consciousness, because when during the Headingley test in 2019, it was actually the last day when when Stokes was single-handedly winning that match, single-handedly with Jack Leach. I had very poorly timed to go and do a talk at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and basically I was on a plane while Stokes was playing that magnificent innings, and I landed in Edinburgh with I think there were about 5 or 6 overs to go, and so I kind of, I had it on my phone, I had my earphones in, and I kind of jumped in a taxi, and I was also late for my event, and everything was happening at once. And I was very, very amped up, and I felt very sorry for my taxi driver, who would kind of obviously didn't understand what was happening, but there was a lot of yelping happening in the back seat as Stokes was blasting the ball all over the place, and then Nathan Lyons was dropping the ball and all this stuff. But anyway, at the end of that, I was like, oh my goodness, we've won. This thing has happened. England just won this test match they shouldn't have won. And the taxi driver said to me, oh, I don't know anything about cricket. I didn't know they were playing today. I don't know. I understand anything you've just said to me. But I know Fruki won the Village Cup. I thought, wow, that was really iconic.
Wonderful. I remember a couple of years ago going into a bar with a crucial moment in a West Indies test against England at Headingley, I think, which West Indies won. And I persuaded, they were very gracious and allowed, should we say it's rather a small bar, and they were watching football. I persuaded them, and they agreed very graciously to turn it over to the cricket. So there you go.
In 2011, India was playing England at Tent Bridge, and we watched the whole day's play. And Hassan was there as well, I think that's right. And they said, oh, well, I'll go away to tea interval. I'll go and before the queue gets busy, I'll get this, that, and that. Went away and came back and things. I only missed one ball. That was the ball before tea, when Ian Bell hit a 4. Only it wasn't a 4. It was stopped just before the boundary, and the fielder kind of kicked it back to the umpire. And the umpire must have thought it was going to be 4 because he was taking the jersey off to give to the bowler. And Bell started walking off, and the Indians, frighteningly, broke the stumps, and there was commotion. And is he out? Is he not out? And he thought he hit a 4, you see, but he was wrong. He did, and I missed that one ball. That was the only thing. The whole match, and the headlines were all about this one ball, which I dashed off to get the sweeties or the cocoa or whatever it was from the shop. And I said to my wife, "What happened?" She didn't know what happened, of course. But
I left Edgbaston early in 2005 as Harmison was bowling Michael Clarke, because I'd miscalculated the overs and I wanted to get away. Anyway, we've all made mistakes like that, or I certainly have. Look, time's running out, but here's another one, anonymous question. Which cricketer do you admire the most and why? I presume living cricketer.
I mean, I wrote a book about mine, so
Go on, tell everybody.
It's no secret that the cricketer, possibly sportsman, possibly just person I most admire, and have done since I was 14, is the former England captain, Mike Atherton. Yes, unfortunately he knows this as well, which makes the whole situation very embarrassing. Because having sort of worked my way up and, been obsessed with cricket and spent all of my, got work experience writing for cricket magazines and then becoming a cricket writer and being an editor at Wisden, and having done all those things and kind of felt like I'd established myself as like a bona fide, sports writer, I then wrote my first book about having a massive crush on Mike Atherton and being in love with the team of the England team of the 1990s. And yes, and that's quite awkward if I catch his eye in the press box.
I'll mention two, if I may. 1961 was my year I saw cricket for the first time. Richie Benaud's tour came to Edinburgh as well. Ken Mackay, left-hand bowler, his favourite shot was the leave. Doesn't sound very exciting. Always chewing gum. Not the most exciting player, but he was a great team man. In the last test match, he didn't bowl much, but he was asked to fill in the bowler shot. He bowled 40 overs as an extra bowler to keep England quiet. Anyway, Ken Mackay was my number one player. I can't explain why. But there was a second player in that team, Brian Booth, who was captain shortly. He was vice captain. He was a very graceful man. He was a real gentleman. He wouldn't play cricket on Sunday. He was Christian, and he believed it was wrong to play on a Sunday. And there's a famous story about him. He was the opposite of sledging. If you think of sledging, turn it upside down. He was batting with Norman O'Neill in a match, and he was given out by a slightly dubious decision, and by the umpire, and Booth walked. In the dressing room, they said, "What happened?" "I must have nicked it," he said. And anyway, a while afterwards, O'Neill came in. That was a diabolical decision against you, but he wouldn't say he thought it was wrong. He just accepted it. A man of grace and great principle. He's still alive to this day. He must be in his 80s. So that's the two people.
So here's a final one, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is the 100 format, this attempt to rebrand and make it exciting for a new audience, going to dent the popularity with those who like it of Test cricket? I think we're all Test cricket fans. So maybe you could both sum up why it is you're lovers of Test cricket. And you may well be of the 100 eventually, but why Test cricket over 5 days is the thing?
It's something that you hear a lot of players talk about, and say that they are afraid for Test cricket, and it's that people who are into cricket always say, look, Test cricket is my favourite. And the reason is, I think, is just very natural to all of us. It's the narrative. It's completely unique. You don't get that kind of ebb and flow in any other kind of sport. Well, maybe chess. I don't know. I don't follow chess, but I understand that chess matches can go on for days and can have an ebb and flow. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes cricket unique and special. And it is worrying that it doesn't pay to play Test cricket for most nations anymore. That's what's the most worrying thing, is that it's like, even though we all say it's our favourite, it's really becoming seriously endangered. I mean, it really is going to be a kind of protected form of the game quite soon, and it might well end up being that only England and Australia and India play Tests together because nobody else can make it pay, and that worries me.
I don't think T20 hasn't hit Test cricket in this country, I don't think, but you are right thinking about other countries. You've got to think about them as well. I was at Durham last week, Durham v Nottinghamshire 4-day game. First day, it wasn't a big crowd, lovely weather. The game was starting at its normal, steady, quiet pace. It was just a wonderful feeling. And that's county championship, of course. You could be at Cheltenham, you could be at Cardiff, you could be at anywhere else, the same atmosphere.
Can I very quickly, with permission, ask you to very quickly tell your Conan Doyle anecdote? Because it's a lovely way to end.
Yeah, Conan Doyle was a great, born in Edinburgh, came from Edinburgh. He was a great cricket fan. But he played 6 first-class matches and got 1 wicket. The wicket he got was W.G. Grace. But the anecdote is that he was unusually caught fire. And recently he had a box of matches in his pocket, and the ball hit the box of matches and ignited them. So Conan Doyle has that unique entry in the scorecard. I don't know how he got in the MCC team. He must have wangled it. But,
and you can read lots more wonderful stories like that in Fraser's books. Emma, Fraser, thank you so much. It's been a total joy, and I wish we could carry on talking. Maybe we will. But anyway, over to Angus. But thank you very much.
Friends, as we wind up this evening, there's one or two thank yous, extended thank yous to make. Behind the scenes this evening, our technical team of Liz and Paul, our logistics of Lucy in the office, and Susan and David hosting as we came in. Of course, on behalf of us all, both in the church and further afield, thank you to Emma and to Fraser. Really, really appreciated it. And a final note. Whichever ground you consider sacred, as we depart this evening, may I offer you a cricketing blessing. God of our sporting passions, who holds dear both starting 11 and 12th man, as the shadows lengthen, delighting in all that we have heard, grant us peace at close of play, with follow-on dreams of glorious innings yet to come. Amen, and safe home, everyone. Good night.